ABC News interviewed David Petraeus to ask his expert commentary and opinion on what he thought of the Russia-Ukraine war.
What should be clear to all, and I think it is even clear to President Trump, is that despite all of his efforts, again, which we applaud, to end a war, to stop the killing, Vladimir Putin clearly has no intention of doing that unless he's given additional territory, which is heavily fortified, and Russian forces would have to fight for years at the pace that they're going. He wants to displace President Zelensky, replace him with a pro-Russian figure, and frankly to demilitarize Ukraine, none of which can be acceptable to Ukraine nor to the European countries and the United States. In fact, by the way, President Zelensky, under the Ukrainian constitution, doesn't even have the authority to declare that certain territory would be controlled by the Russians. That would have to go to a national referendum. So again, I think it should be clear. The obstacle to peace at this point in time is President Putin. And what we need to do is change those dynamics by helping Ukraine far more than we have so far, lifting restrictions on them, seizing the $300 billion of frozen reserve in European countries of Russian money, giving it to Ukraine, more sanctions on Russia, even including the Gazprom bank, and curtailing the export of oil further than we have already.
First of all, a commentary on the substance of what he said in that, which is complete and utter nonsense. He is just repeating this view that the elite in this country and in the West want to portray. Russia is the evil guy. They're the aggressor. They have no valid security interest. This war was unprovoked. And what they're suggesting is unacceptable to the Western and the Ukrainian side. Ergo, it won't pass. We simply won't do it. It doesn't matter because the Russians are evil. Therefore, we certainly won't do what the evil guy wants. And so that leads to the obvious conclusion that the only impediment to peace is Russia. It can't be that the Ukraine side and the Western side writ large have grotesquely failed in the diplomatic arena, and that they have failed and refused, even worse than failed, they have refused to end the war through diplomatic means every time it happened, to include 2015, the Minsk Accords, December 2021 on the eve of it, and all the points since that time, to include the one in our lap right now. They only want to go down the path of more war. Now, that's on Petraeus. Here's the problem that has me upset here, and in the context of the media situation. ABC News put David Petraeus on there because they look at a piece of paper and they go, former CIA director, former four-star general, the hero of Iraq and the Iraq surge, etc. And so they go, yep, qualified guy. Put a mic in his face and let's see what expert opinion he has to offer. Nobody pushed back on any of the things that he had said there. This is one of the big failures of the mainstream media. When they put named people up there, no one said, it seems to me, I remember, General, that earlier in this war, you had some really bad ideas and some things that you said were catastrophically wrong. Or maybe we can say, I remember also that you talked about the Iraq situation. You were the so-called hero, but we still have troops on the ground there. That was literally never solved. And kind of, oh, by the way, instead of creating a model democracy in the Middle East, we created a very pro-Iranian regime that's very friendly to them. In fact, has Iranian agents inside of their armed forces. Some of their Iran-backed militia are literally officially part of their armed forces. Doesn't seem like that was a really good outcome. And then there's that thing about the 20-year disaster in Afghanistan that you presided over, told us was winning, and it turned out that it was like a literal and complete loss. Or they might have said, hey, how's about this, what you said on May 31st, 2023, right on the eve of the Ukrainian Armed Forces offensive?
I believe that we'll see for the first time in this war on either side the achievement of true combined arms effects. In other words, the results of tanks protected by infantry against anti-tank guided missiles, artillery and mortars keeping the enemy's heads down, engineers reducing the obstacles, breaching these fortifications that the Russians have established, air defense keeping the Russians off the Ukrainians, electronic warfare jamming the Russians' already inadequate command and control facilities, and all orchestrated by very, very good Ukrainian command and control, and also using drones out over the Russians to attack them in depth with the precision munitions that the U.S. and U.K. and others have provided. And this, I think, is going to break the front lines. On the Russian side, this is a force that has been battered, that many of these units have been in constant combat for well over a year. They're not pulling units offline and reconstituting them, in other words, replacing the losses, the people, the equipment, and retraining them. They're just adding people to the front lines. That's not the way you produce a cohesive, coherent, well-disciplined organization. And I think, therefore, that's why they're going to crack, crumble, and perhaps actually collapse.
Wow. The Russians are going to crack, crumble, and collapse May 31st, 2023. Now, I selected that soundbite there because Petraeus went into a lot of detail on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side to come to his conclusion that they would break through to the Azov coast and that they would break that land bridge. That was the big thing at the time. And you can say, well, I mean, that was his best estimate at the time. He thought that way, but as it turned out, the Russians were better at defense than anybody knew. And who could have foreseen that? Nobody gets it right all the time. No, that's not right, because months before that date, I had been writing extensively, really all the way back into 2021. This was a war the Ukraine side can't win. And I specifically wrote, heading into, I think, at least 2 separate analysis pieces prior to the 2023 offensive in detail. I wrote about why it would fail, and some of the reasons were not even hard to figure out. That's what you need to understand. This guy comes off as the CIA director, a 4-star general, a military hero, and yet he can't do the most basic analysis of understanding that the Ukraine side, they had no history of offensive warfare, maneuver warfare of the type that they were being asked to do. So they had no training. They had a lot of training, 8 years worth, in positional warfare and in defense along trench lines, etc. But they didn't have the forces to do offensive operations. They didn't have the training how to do that. And crucially, they didn't have the intelligence support, the engineering support, and the know-how to how to breach defensive lines. And probably above all of that, they didn't have air support. You have to have, even by our doctrine, you've got to at least have air parity if you're going to go in and breach a heavily defended, fortified, mined trench lines and defensive lines, especially when you're talking a series of 5 of them. And because it was so clear where this was going to come, it was so grossly telegraphed that the Russians made sure that they had their best defenses in the area where the Ukraine side was coming, because it was long telegraphed. Everybody knew where it was going to go. The whole land bridge, go to the Azov coast. I mean, it was talked about ad nauseum. So the Russians listened to that. But this guy is coming off as this absolute subject matter expert that they put that microphone into on the BBC, on that one example I gave you right there. But he was catastrophically wrong. And when he had more than enough information, probably more than I did, because as a former general, he's got access to all kinds of people who will give him insider information that I didn't have. So how can it be that somebody was so wrong? They were so wrong in the Afghanistan war, and then he blamed everybody in the world for that as well. And then today, just days ago, ABC News sticks another microphone in his face and asks him to give another expert commentary on the same war he's already demonstrated catastrophically bad advice. That goes to show you that the media itself is deeply flawed. Do they not know this? Are they unaware of that clip that I showed? Are they unaware of 20 years of failure in Afghanistan? Are they unaware we still have troops in Iraq today and that the Iraqi government is now much more friendly to Iran than it was before? Or is it that whoever is funding ABC News want people to believe that we need to keep funding the war? But what you can't get past, and is not a subject of opinion, is the fact that they do bring on knowingly bad, flawed people and ignoring the horrible failures that they've had in the past. I'm going to look at one more example here. Ben Hodges, a retired 3-star general, used to be the commander of the United States Army in Europe, all of our European forces. So again, incredible on paper, looks really good, but there's some problems here too.
I think President Zelensky, and probably most of the European leaders, know that actually the situation on the ground in Ukraine is not as bad as it is kind of portrayed in public. The Russians, I think, and I'm seeing more and more reports that they don't have unlimited time and resources. So I think President Zelensky feels confident that if he continues to get support that he can continue to defend Ukraine until the Russians culminate.
Really, the Ukrainian defenders, they're doing pretty good. They're not doing as bad as what we've heard. Really? Because you have somewhere between 500 and 700 per day leaving the field of battle, deserting their country outright. I think it was 110,000 is what's officially reported in Ukraine this calendar year so far, of people who are been brought up on charges for desertion. Who knows how many of them haven't been charged yet? But that's just the official number. And of course, the number of casualties is a state secret. They don't even admit anything at all. But recently hacked information claims that the cumulative number over all the years of the war is a staggering number. I don't know if it's true or not. The reports is 1.7 million killed. That seems a little high to me, just because of the number of people that would have to have been wounded, and the same cause would be in the multiple millions. And I don't know that they have had that many, but it is something really high. A certain source that I won't cite here, but is very knowledgeable, said that they thought that the number could be around 800 to 850,000 dead Ukrainians. We'll just stick with that one because it's going to be somewhere close to that. It's probably somewhere in between the two, maybe even. But it is a staggering number. And now then, not only are you suffering daily casualties because the Russian firepower volumes continue to increase both in the air and on the ground. So it stands to reason that the casualties will continue at that same level. And you're talking about the loss of all of those troops from desertion. Now, how then can you claim that, well, they're really doing pretty good, even though from November 2023 until today, it has been a non-stop Russian advance, causing massive casualties on the Ukrainian side. There's not been any pushback. There's been a couple of temporary offensive operations and counterattacks by the Ukrainian side, like the one in Kursk region, couple that's going actually in the Sumy region right now. There's another one in the Zaporizhia area where they carved out a couple of villages. Several other times, like in the Kupiansk region, they periodically do those, but they're all small, they're all tactical, and they always lose them. Or the ill-fated one in Krinky, and also in 2023. Every time they have done an offensive operation, the objectives fail, and they end up losing the territory that they had taken back. That's just how it's worked, because they don't have the numbers. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the weapons and the ammunition. And so that will continue on. Now, even in the area of drones, Russia is starting to have an advantage. It's not an overwhelming advantage yet, but it's not parity like it was just a matter of months ago. And yet here is General Hodges, having you believe that the situation is not that bad. And that actually, and this is the most irrational and illogical point that he could make, here he is saying that it will be the Russians who will culminate. That's military terminology for they will be exhausted, they won't have enough manpower, political will, or ammunition to continue on, and they'll just stop in their tracks. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. To the contrary, Russia continues to accelerate. You may remember a month or so ago, we showed you some satellite imagery that had been released, that Russia had a whole new complex, a factory complex for the production of ammunition and weapon systems. A whole complex of it that's still being built on top of what they already have. They're not even slowing down with the acceleration. So upon what basis would any rational military analyst say that the Russian side can be reached a culmination by the side that has far fewer, millions fewer potential troops than the side that has so many more resources in every category, almost limitless in relative terms? And yet that's what he's saying there. And so that's Deutsche Welle, which loves, that's a German outfit. It's called Deutsche Welle, DW. And because he used to live in Germany, I think he actually still does live in Germany as a private citizen now, they love him. And he was ingratiated himself to them during the time that he was serving in the U.S. Army there in Europe. And okay, they may like him personally. He seems like a nice enough fellow, but man, his advice is just sensationally bad. Now, if I showed you a minute ago how Petraeus' current advice was flawed at face value, and then I showed you why did ABC News put him on there when he had said what I showed you about the offensive, the Ukraine offensive in 2023, it was even worse, the dichotomy between what Hodges just said and what he said also in our early 2023, because he was claiming not only would the Ukraine side get to the Azov coast, which is what Petraeus thought, and I would say to his credit, he doesn't actually get credit, but at least he didn't say that they would win the war. He just said they would cut the land bridge, and then that would cause more trouble for Russia. Hodges went so far as to say, well, I'll just let him say it for himself.
General Hodges, because you have, in general, been very optimistic about Ukraine's ability to repel the Russian invasion and even march on Crimea. Earlier, a couple of months ago, you said that you expected that to happen by summer. Do you stand by that?
Yeah, by the end of August, Ukraine will have been able to liberate Crimea if, and I've always included this caveat, if we provide them the long-range precision weapons that they need to do that. Yes, absolutely, they can do that.
No, absolutely, they couldn't do that. I mean, just to get to the Azov coast, you would have had to have air power, not long-range missiles. Long-range missiles are useful, but that's stuff that strikes deep in an enemy rear, which can limit its ability to supply the front line, which the Russians have been doing almost without pause since about October of 2022. That's how long that's been. Or, I'm sorry, October 2023. That's how long that's been going on, virtually nonstop. And of course, it's escalating now. And you see, we're talking Kinzhal missiles, the hypersonics, these new jet-powered Garand-2 drones, and then just tons of other capabilities, glide bombs, etc. Russia is just saturating Ukraine in all of these categories, and yet it still hasn't caused a collapse of the front line, because that's not what long-range fires do. They're a component of a campaign. You have to have a campaign, which means you have to have thousands of these things to use over a period of time to deepen and weaken the fabric of their support system. You can't do it just knocking out a couple of refineries or a couple of factories here and there. It's got to be sustained, because the enemy the receiving side will always rebuild and repair to some extent what they can. So you've got to maintain that pressure. And so for him to say, well, this one category of long-range weapons, then they would get to Crimea, means he doesn't even understand the first thing about tactics or operational art, or how at national level combat power is actually built, trained, and exerted on a wartime situation. Because if you don't have at least air parity, it's going to be damn near impossible just to get to the Azov coast. And you've got to have a trained up manpower, and they've got to be equipped with the right kind of and the right set of skills, none of which they had, as I pointed out there. But he goes further than Petraeus by saying they would go into Crimea, for crying out loud, which means you'd get all the way through the Azov coast, turn south, and then defeat all the Russian armies down there, then get into Crimea and defeat all those Russians, and then take Sevastopol. That's what it would mean by the end of August, he said. So not the beginning of August, but the end of August. I mean, that was never even a fantasy. Nobody had any idea to take that seriously that knows anything about it. And yet, folks, that wasn't even like for Petraeus. It was the BBC in the past and ABC now. That was Deutsche Welle. And Deutsche Welle, DW.com, that's one of the major flagship outlets that the German government country uses to produce its information. So they should have seen, and that woman in 2023 tried to give him a chance for an out by saying, you have said, you've been very optimistic, and you have said that by summer it was going to be that. Do you still stand by it? That was April. That was about 2 months before the start of the operation. And he, again, confidently repeated it. As it turns out, I could have given you another one. I think it was even from September that year, after it was manifestly clear that the offensive failed. He still said that, yes, we can do it. No, I'm sorry, not September. It was in July. It was in July, because the August was still yet to come. He was still standing by it then. It's like you don't even know what long-range fires are for, what they can accomplish, or how they can be effective, integrated into a larger plan. And yet there he is again, about a week ago, that same DW, putting him back on the film again, interviewing him again. So there are people who probably have no idea what he said in 2023, like you do now, because we're providing context. It's one of the things we do on this channel all the time. So they only see what's in front of their noses. But I dare say it's unlikely that the people at Deutsche Welle don't know very clearly what he said in 2023. And one has to wonder, do they also not care? Maybe they don't even, it doesn't bother them what he said then, or how catastrophically he was wrong back in the past, because he's given a narrative that their side wants to pursue, which is, and of course, you know, Chancellor Merz, and then we could go the same thing, Keir Starmer in Britain, Emmanuel Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, Kaya Kallas, and Mark Rutte, all of that crew, all of that elite crew, they keep wanting the war to go on. They have rejected every defensive possibility to try and I'm sorry, I said defensive, diplomatic path to get out of the war. There were many of them. There's still one on the table now. They have rejected them all and only want to go after more ammunition. So now you have Germany ramping up their attempts at production. You have the French ramping up their attempts at production. They're trying to grow. The Germans are trying to grow their army bigger. All of NATO is trying to go from some barely 1% up to 5% total defense spending over some number of years. It seems like they don't want any news that would say, we really don't need this. Just consider all these countries, especially in the UK, because we have a lot of information on them, that by spending all this additional money on their own defense and sending arms and ammunition and money to the Ukraine side now to keep it afloat means that they have to go into more debt, or they have to start cutting services for their people because they just don't have enough money to go around. And that's exactly what they're doing. And that's gotten a lot of people unhappy there. Now imagine, and some of them they're upset, but because the British people believe, because of the saturation of their mainstream media with these issues, Ian Puddock tells us about that a lot, they are they're upset about the social stuff, but they're not pushing back too hard. Now imagine if instead, let's say that President Trump and the European leaders finally got together with Zelensky in the room and said, dude, it ain't going to fly. You're not going to win. We keep going down this path, your country will be destroyed. Your citizens will be killed. You'll lose everything if we go down this path. We're not going to do that. So you're going to have to just take the ugly deal that's on the table now, and we're going to get the war over with. What do you think all of these people over the next 3 to 5 years in Europe, all these citizens of the various countries, are going to say when their governments keep saying, no, we have to spend all this money because of the great Satan in the East, the Russians, they could come for us next. If they see the Russians don't come for them next, if they see the Russians actually do any version of what they said and just get on with peace and say, all right, now that we're done, we're not going anywhere else. Now we're now looking to get back into the economies of Europe. We want to have business to trade with them. We want to get back to normalized relations. You see where I'm going with this, right? The elite in the West don't want that path. They don't want to get back to that kind of a relationship, because then it will be obvious to their people that, well, there's no reason to go to 5% of GDP. But you said Russia was coming first, and they aren't. They just want to do business with us. They want to live in peaceful coexistence, etc. So now then they wouldn't support that. So one can argue, and listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, whatever, and then I'm going to make declarative statements when I don't have knowledge. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, because it is also possible that these people are just delusional, that maybe they believe these things and they're thinking, oh my God, the only way I can protect my country is in this ramp up to militarism. I don't know. All I can say with great confidence is that what they are doing is violating any chance to have peace, and they are expanding every opportunity and using the media to convey this, to keep the populations going in this direction, and even begrudgingly keep supporting the diversion of lots of their national wealth into militants. That's what we know. That is happening. It's up to the people of each of these countries to decide for themselves which political leaders are going to have their best interest at heart, etc. But you need to be very clear on this. And one of the main reasons, probably the primary reason Gary and I formed this channel in the first place, is because we wanted to provide context, honesty, and consistency with what, as best I can tell from my experience and research and study that we can do, is to what the truth is, whether it's something you like or not. That's why our tagline is, we're unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, whatever it is. And sometimes we bring you truth and perspectives that you don't like. Oftentimes I bring somebody with a different perspective on, and a lot of people who have an opposite perspective don't like it, and they make their opinions clear in the comments section here, which they're invited to do. One of the reasons, also a benefit of our channel, as opposed to, a broadcast network where all you can do is yell at the TV. Here you can actually participate and enjoy with some of your fellow travelers who are also on this, and that we can ask you to continue doing that. I've never tried to silence anybody's voice on these chats, etc. You're free to say whatever you want. That's what we do. We put the information out there. Do with it whatever you will. But it is crucial that you understand that a great deal in the mainstream media of any stripe, conservatives, liberal, even so-called medium, sometimes you got to take everything with a grain of salt and get your information from other places, because most of the time, especially those that are specifically conservative and specifically liberal, will fail to report whole categories of news so that their view gets slanted over to where whoever is paying the bills there wants it to go. Understand that. That's why we, at least so far, we have chosen, we don't have any advertisers. Maybe in the future we'll do that. I don't know. We kicked that around before. Maybe I can sell shave cream or something, or something silly like that and benign. But we're never going to get into a situation to where some corporate entity has any kind of leverage over us, because we rely on folks like you joining our channel here with a paid membership, or liking and subscribing. That really helps expand our view. More people we invite to come in and watch, because the more that does, the bigger our ability to expand to others as well. And that's why here lately we've expanded even what we're doing here into the podcast realm, because sometimes we invite you to ask some of your friends who might not even sit down and watch a video, but will listen to a podcast in their in their cars or going to work or whatever. They just like the audio. Send them that. Let them know that Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict, all they got to do is type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. They can find us there. And as Gary was showing there, we're also in the written word, because some people prefer that. They like the written word. So we actually do published works as well, along with some of the videos we do. You can see both there at danieldavisdeepdive.substack.com. Truly, we do ask that you share this with people, because the stuff that you're getting here, to the best of our ability, and we're a relatively small operation, and our reach is limited because we don't have a big staff of researchers, et cetera. But we do the best we can to always go where the evidence leads, where the truth is, whether it's something your side likes or not, or something I like or not. You're going to continue to get that here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive, because we will not go down the path that the mainstream media is, and either by omission or slanted views try to compel people to believe or think a certain thing is true, especially when we know it's not. And that's one of the things that's going to continue to distinguish us. And I just felt like today you needed to know what's really going on in some of this mainstream. Although it seems like most of you do. Gary keeps popping up those polls that show people are getting it. We get it too. And this is one place you can come to get that kind of information that you actually need to make sense of the world around you. Thanks, folks. We really appreciate it. We got another person who's just as focused on the truth, and that is John Mearsheimer, Professor John Mearsheimer, who's going to talk this afternoon at 3 p.m. Deadly attacks are Russia's answer to the attempts right now to have peace, whereas on our side, sloppy, muddled peace strategies are the only result. He's going to lay that out for you in the next segment of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. See you then.